Sveiki. Visiems primenu, kad
Good morning. May I remind you that you may ask questions on slido.com or entering a security conference hashtag or simply by scanning this QR code on the screen. The Parliament will vote this week on ministers, and you will become a minister, not a minister designate. But we probably can already start our conversations by discussing certain topicalities. The EU will have to step in to stabilize the situation in Syria, but you haven't responded what this direct role of the EU will be in Syria. Well, indeed, EU is already involved in Syria's situation for a number of years, for as long as the conflict lasts, and that interference is both direct and indirect in dealing with the situation with refugees. After so many people fled Syria, they have come to the EU. Many of them are in neighboring states in Turkey. And the EU spends hundreds of billions to help maintain them. So we'll see what will happen next with those people, if they will be willing to repatriate or if they will be willing to stay. But the EU has many important tools, humanitarian, financial tools, which should give a true impact in addressing those issues, these geopolitical issues. And I don't only refer to stability in the region, but it should also help us address the institutional stability in those countries. So yes, the EU may have a play here, may have a role here. Of course, that is very complicated, and then the constellation of influences of different states, of course, that is present. We see different regional powers, but taking into account the fact that the geopolitical approach of the EU is 360, and we have a strong focus on the southern axis, that is towards Africa. So if we don't deal with that, if we don't deal with the Russia's impact, so we will not be able to resolve the situation. So of course, we need to use those financial and economic tools into our power tools. What likely consequences Russia may feel or have already felt of the events in Syria? Well, the Bashar Assad's departure to Moscow already has some impact because all this tension, which has lasted for almost 10 years, not only with the regime, but also in between different groups of militants. So it had the threat of turning into a fully fledged military conflict. So definitely that's something that we have to avoid. But I truly hope, and I would like to emphasize that I don't really believe that it only relied on Russia's decision to step back, not to support. But what we saw on the ground, that we saw those air attacks against the forces which were moving towards the Damascus, we could see that there were too little resources. And so whether that will be taken into account, I'm not sure. But that is the interest of Lithuania, that is the interest of the EU, that Russia should not have a military airbase over there where it could implement its destructive democracy-eroding activities. Ukraine. We cannot do without Ukraine. The president said that we have to continue along the line, and Trump also understands that Ukraine has no right to surrender. And we also had the idea that there are only 6 months left until the end of war in Ukraine. How do you see what is the most realistic end of the war in Ukraine? The assessment on likely end of the war hasn't changed since 2022. So there are three likely scenarios, and which one will be the real one, that only depends on Ukraine and Russia. So, and it does not really refer to Ukraine alone. It also refers to Lithuania as well. So the first option that they would not have any NATO perspective, any European perspective, and would have a free space to meet corrupt and all the other interests. The other scenario is realistic guarantees that it would get from its partners, from its allies, either in bilateral terms or in multilateral terms. And we see that only United States are able to grant those guarantees for today. And the third option, which is also possible, that Ukraine, at least conventionally, would deter Russia, and that we could model this on paper. Don't ask how much it would cost, because it would be huge figures. But if we talk about certain timelines, so these are the choices. When it comes to what Lithuania says, so we have to work on NATO scenario because it's the closest one, because it is the easiest one, and it depends on our decisions. What is unacceptable, so Russia's dominance in Ukraine, both in military terms and political terms, and the third, if we fail to collect all those funds and we cannot dedicate more, so nobody will prove me that we can strengthen Ukrainian forces to the level that they will be able to fight back Russia's forces. So those are the scenarios. So they were in 2022, so they are still present. And if people think about 2025, let's say that we will only be fighting for 6 months and then we will be reaping the fruit, no, I'm totally skeptical about this option, because I believe there are 3 assumptions that are misleading, that are that there will be a ceasefire and we'll start talking. No, all the practice with Russia shows that no, there will be an escalation, and then there will be many more deaths. Another assumption is that Russia will not negotiate about Ukraine. Russia will negotiate about Americans in Europe and military infrastructure everywhere. And the third assumption is that we have some greater leverage. We don't have any greater leverage. What is different from 2022 to the situation that we have now? Now we speak more and more about decent and honest ceasefire. So how do we ensure this? Yermak, who works in the U.S. actively with the administration, has been asking this, and what we can do, what other guarantees we can ensure and extend to the Ukraine.
Guarantees would come from the countries that have the capabilities to deter Russia. So this is a difference to bilateral guarantees. For example, if countries have agreements with the EU, with the US, bilateral guarantees provide some degree of uncertainty, whereas with Russia, you have to have guarantees. You have to have points 1, 2, 3 translated into Russian and sent to Russia. So if this is the scenario, if there is aggression, the response will be like that. So we'll be tested definitely, and we will have to implement and enforce what we've planned. In 2022, we also had negotiations in the spring of that year. But if you look at the pictures of the country of geographical region, you will see completely different sentiment from that we saw in the negotiation. If we were to look at the military capacities, let's remember that in 2022's summer we were calculating ammunition, what kind of equipment the countries had, tanks, maybe ammunition, when the tanks will be available to Ukraine. We had completely different calculations. In Lithuania alone, in 2026, we'll have a new plant that will be producing ammunition and will be able to supply Ukraine. We are planning to support Ukraine for the next 10 years. And no matter what is the outcome of the war, the Lithuanian commitment is to support Ukraine for the next 10 years. And we believe that commitment should be extended. This is the only way to force Russia to sit at the table of negotiations. So what could be the format of securities for Ukraine without membership in NATO? Well, we can provide multilateral securities, guarantees, even without the membership in NATO. So political, military guarantees, but do we need a different organization that would provide analogous equivalent securities and guarantees to Ukraine? We have NATO. Why shouldn't we opt for the NATO solution? Simply because we have several countries within NATO who are against against Ukraine's membership, but there is room for negotiation. Yes, we should just talk to countries who are opposing Ukrainian membership, and we need just simply to have regional plans, plans based on our military capabilities. We need to commit to certain GDP numbers to increase our military capacities. But these should be actions, not talks, because Russia looks at us and sees this as bluffing. Would you support the democratic vote, that the decisions regarding membership shouldn't be voted unanimously? On certain questions and certain points, yes, I believe that we should drop the requirement of unanimous vote. For example, things are related to sanctions. In separate cases, we could drop the unanimous vote, but again, we should define what we're talking about, because the current situation reminds us postponing sanctions should not be an option. Sanctions should be painful financially. If that means that Lithuania would suffer and sanctions would not be extended, would not continue because they would require a unanimous vote, yes, then I believe that we should drop the unanimous vote. President Gitanas Nausėda already talked about the need for this foreign policy in respect of Russia and China. What kind of policy would you support in respect of China? When we look into the Middle East, into the Far East, Lithuanian foreign policy in regards to other countries has changed. Whereas policy regarding China has never changed. We believe that China changed its approach to Lithuania, and they decided to lower the level of diplomatic relations. They decided to close down their diplomatic representation here in Lithuania. Lithuania decided to deepen its relationships on maybe cultural level. Would you encourage and change in foreign policy in regards to China? All countries want to have a channel to maintain normal diplomatic relationships, to deal with daily issues. That's the same thing we would like to have. We want to have our diplomatic representations functioning. Yes, that would be amazing, but if that doesn't work, any other type of cooperation would be impossible. So you would want to have a deeper diplomatic and political cooperation with China. Yes, if we're talking about a properly functioning embassy in that country, yes, I would want to have that. We have questions from the audience. Some of the questions are in English, some in Lithuanian. One of the questions is, can you now tell about the members of the staff you will have as the Minister of Defense, or for Foreign Affairs, I'm sorry. Once I'm appointed as the minister, you will get the details about who is part of my team.
Nordic-Baltic cooperation, why is it important? Ar prioritetas bus Šiaurės Baltijos šalių kooperacija bendradarbiavimas?
this is one of the regional formats that proved itself, and not only in the field of foreign policy, but also in other fields of harder security communities, so to say, where I have also experience. And all those times when we cannot achieve the results as the independent country, as the being in a bilateral interaction, or being as the sole country in EU or NATO, it proved itself as a working format. We are like-minded countries. We are committed to Ukraine. We are committed to the security and peace in Europe. We understand what Russia's hostile activities means. We see on ourselves all the forms of the hybrid activities. So it's the best place to look for the joint solutions. Also, what's related to the future of Ukraine and of Europe. So yes, I will invest into that.
Our value policy, is it relevant in the context of Israeli and Palestine conflict? I could go deeper into the value policy, what kind of policy we have, how it was defined. Since 2025, the national security strategy includes the same values. You can call them statements, you can call them values, but we always saw security as our priority, transatlantic cooperation, democracy in the neighboring countries, human rights protection. That was always a priority, so I don't see major changes in these values. So we can say that this is our value policy, and we can use this when we fight with autocratic regimes. And when it comes to the conflict in question, yes, protection of human rights and humanitarian situation are important to us. And we definitely want to have the solutions that are sustainable in that regard. And
Trump withdraws support for Ukraine. Does Europe have a contingency plan to address the situation?
Not yet, and I would even doubt whether it is possible. All the worst-case scenarios were played and contemplated around a year already, and we did it also in Lithuania, as every big capital, as Vilnius also did in Europe, and we see that there are no substitutes for U.S. support to Ukraine, what concerns defense equipment and weaponry, and also what concerns political support. So there are no substitutes. Whether we will be invested or whether we will, withdraw ourselves from Ukraine, if something happens, I won't jump into the scenarios. No, we won't. And we understand this fight as the fight for the Europe's future. So we will be in there. Doesn't matter what the other circumstances will be then.
Then a sub-question. What do we have to do to make sure that Ukraine maintains Trump's support? Let's put that everyone maintains Trump's support, because we are seeing more efforts to circumvent the sanctions. The sanctions are getting weaker. So what do we need to do to maintain Trump's support for Ukraine? We need to have clear arguments, points 1 to 3, to present them to the new administration, Trump's administration, and convince them that it's also a relevant matter for the U.S., that it is that without stable Ukraine long-term, the U.S. will suffer as well. Because financially, economically, security in Ukraine would benefit the U.S. We know that revisionist countries seek that. They want to reshape the world. They want to have a new world order. So the U.S. can project its power. U.S. can support solution for Ukraine. Without the U.S. support, there is no new order. The U.S. needs Europe. Yes, Europe needs the U.S., but we are the ones in Europe who support, who enable the U.S. and its dominance in the world. So we need to focus on how dangerous Russia and China are. And besides these two countries, we have a new geopolitical context emerging. We see disturbances in Africa, in Southeastern Asia. We want to see a different world, and we want to have a world where smaller countries are protected, and that's what should matter to the U.S. So thank you very much. We had and listened to the Minister Designate of Foreign Affairs, Kęstutis Budrys.